today's episode of the Security Pill, we have Mr. Maheswaran with us. He is an expert in information security and currently serves as the current country head at Veronis. Veronis is a well-known software company focused on data security. We are thrilled to have you with us, Mr. Maheswaran. So I would not take much time. I'll get into my first question. Over the years, we've seen how technology has advanced and so has cybersecurity threats. So in such a scenario, how do you think can organizations balance cybersecurity measures with the need for growth and innovation?
Firstly, Avantika, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been a pleasure to be part of this discussion. I think, like the way you mentioned, the threat landscape is constantly evolving and organizations are pressurized to innovate fast, grow faster. And it's very important to have that balance for them to ensure that they see constant growth and they are able to innovate constantly. One thing it's very critical for cybersecurity practitioners or the security leaders for every organization is to make the board and every employee believe that cybersecurity is for them to move faster, for them to be becoming much more efficient and productive. Like the way, I normally give this analogy. We have good braking systems in cars to give confidence for drivers to move fast, right? So that's how cybersecurity has to be perceived. And if that culture is established by the security practitioners and leaders with both the leadership team as well as the end users, I think the organizations will be in a much better state to embrace growth and innovation in a secure manner. Because we have seen a lot of instances where organizations were out of business after a breach, right? So their market value was dropped significantly. They were struggling to grow at the pace that they were growing earlier. So there were several such instances. So it's very, very important to treat cybersecurity as a business risk, not just an IT or a security risk. And security has to be embedded at grassroots level and it should be part of an organization's culture. So before they go ahead and embrace any new strategy for growing faster or any innovation strategy, it's also important to constantly evaluate the risks associated with it and also have a plan to mitigate that risk. And at any point in time, the cybersecurity risk around that strategy, that's going to make them decelerate or make the businesses much more bigger than the growth possibilities. It's important for organizations to understand that and have a plan to mitigate that risk is what we think of it.
Quite rightly said. As you mentioned, that it is important to have cybersecurity at the grassroots level. So let me come to the topic of zero trust model and how do you think that is preventing and mitigating that? How does zero trust model help in preventing and mitigating breaches? And if you could share a real world scenario where such like a zero trust model can particularly be effective.
Yeah, so again, it's a very good question. So zero trust, what it essentially means is, it's an approach that allows organizations not to trust anything, be it a user or on a device or an asset. Even if the user or a device is within the network, it doesn't trust them by default, right? So that's the approach. And in a way, if organizations embrace it, the risk posture will be reduced drastically. And I'll just, since you said, I have to just give an example on how we have seen an organization benefit because of the strategy. But before that, I'll mention that when organizations are looking at embracing zero trust, the core focus has to be protecting their key assets. And I think for most organizations, the key assets would be data and users, right? So, and hackers are also going after them. Finally, attacks happen for them to get data that they want to or get credentials of users so they can get access to data much faster. So it's important for organizations to embrace the strategy around these two core assets. And when they do that, then the strategy is going to be much more effective in helping them visualize how risk reduction metrics could be easily visualized, and organizations will be able to demonstrate tangible benefits because of embracing this strategy. And I'll explain this with an example. So one of our prospects, when we engaged in performing a data security posture assessment, they wanted to implement zero trust. So what we said is, why don't you start having a least access privilege model around data? First, assess risk on what is your risk posture around information overexposure. And then if the risk is significant, then look at having the least access privilege model. So we performed an assessment on their critical data stores. And to our surprise, we saw almost 40% of information overexposed to everybody within that organization. I shouldn't use the word surprise because this is what we see. To their surprise is what I should say. So 40% of the information was exposed to everybody, and this included, I'll give you some actual examples. A secretary of a board member created a team site for the board members to collaborate, and that had about 600 GB of data. And this site was created just for the board members to collaborate. But the default exposure for the team site is everybody in the organization can access. So they didn't actually look at who has got permissions to access that information. Similarly, we have seen sensitive intellectual property, R&D information being accessed to everybody. Very critical passwords being accessed to contractors, despite contractors, the contract with them got terminated. So when organizations evaluate risk around information overexposure, they get to understand what is the quantity of risk that they have to go through, and what possibly could be the risks in terms of ransomware, data exfiltration, data breaches, etc. So we help them to get this visual, get them to quantify the breach associated because of information overexposure. And through our strategy, we recommended them to implement a least access privilege model around by leveraging automation. And within 3 months, we were able to reduce the risk exposure significantly, and they were able to see tangible benefits in ensuring that only right users have access to information, and their attack posture, or what we call as blast radius, got reduced significantly, almost by 60% in 3 months' time. So we have seen a lot of such instances where, because of organizations embracing zero trust, the risk posture got minimized significantly, and they're able to show these tangible benefits to the leadership team and gain more confidence in getting budgets to enhance their security framework. I hope I answered your question, Avanti.
Yeah, you have. Obviously,
Yeah.
with the way the threat landscape is expanding, how would you say that threat models have evolved in response to the cybersecurity landscapes? And can you discuss some of the emerging trends and threats and challenges, especially around AI, which organizations must be aware of?
Yeah, so I think AI definitely, like any technology, I think it has its own pros and cons, and definitely AI has helped even cybersecurity significantly in bringing a lot of automation, helping security practitioners to orchestrate a lot of controls with minimal operational overhead. So definitely there's been a huge benefit because of leveraging AI in cybersecurity. But at the same time, we also have started seeing hackers leveraging this probably in a much more organized way, right? So, and that is so one of the significant changes I would say when it comes to threat landscape is the pace with which attacks are happening, and the pace with which hackers are gaining access to data and threatening organizations to pay ransom by showing evidence that they have the data. So AI is leveraged significantly by hackers, and some of the things that I think cybersecurity practitioners need to be aware of, when it comes to AI, which I think they're already aware, is one, I guess, there is also a term called AI enhanced malware or AI enabled malware. So where now malware authors are leveraging automation to create advanced malware that, based on the environment that it gets deployed, it learns to understand what all security defenses are there because of the AI capabilities that it has, and automatically builds an evasive technique to bypass security defenses that are deployed in those environments. So I think we have started seeing these things happening, which is one of the reasons why hackers are now able to probably penetrate organizations even with a mature security framework in place. So that's one. Secondly, I think phishing has become more effective now because of AI. I think hackers have started using AI to analyze a lot of attributes about user by performing queries to social engineering presence that particular individual has or that particular organization has, what actually would interest that particular user at that moment. So they use AI to get all this intel and come up with a very targeted phishing attack, because the chances of the user falling prey to that would be much higher because they gather all this intel before launching this attack. And I think, like I said earlier, the attacks can be now executed at a larger scale, at a massive scale. Can quickly probe vulnerabilities and exploit that exist in an organization's network. AI can be used to also understand this current security posture very fast And all this could be used to automate and orchestrate attacks very fast and evade most controls that organizations would have. So I think these are some of the things that organizations need to be aware of and ensure that the cybersecurity framework is also having enough controls in place and stays relevant with the techniques that probably the hacking community is using to create havoc for organizations, I think.
Clearly, AI is a double-edged sword that we need to watch out for. And as you rightly said, organizations need to be one step ahead of hackers to utilize this tool. Otherwise, it can backfire in a very negative way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
No, please carry on.
Now, one of the things is this: we call this as data manipulation or data poisoning. So I think when organizations are trying to embrace AI to achieve a specific outcome, they also have to probably understand if the data gets fed into that, if it's manipulated, what are going to be the implications, right? And how robust is that particular technology that they're embracing is against data manipulation or data poisoning. Yeah, and we have seen some instances where this happened also in the past. So, and from a cybersecurity perspective, again, organizations are leveraging AI ML models to automate security. But if the data that gets fed in, if that can be manipulated or can be compromised, that also could be used to evade those controls that are in place and for make hackers to deploy malware or malicious tools or exploits and then create havoc. So it's even when organizations are embracing AI for themselves, it's important for them to evaluate how robust it is. Is there a way data that is getting fed into that AI model can be manipulated or not? How easy or tough it is for that to be manipulated? And what is impact if it gets manipulated? All that needs to be assessed, and they have to have controls in place to ensure that doesn't happen. So, which again we don't see happening because organizations blindly trust, most vendors' AI ML models, and if they don't know the implications of data poisoning or data manipulations, and if that happens, it can create a very negative impact for that particular organization.
Absolutely. As you mentioned that there have been incidents where you noted how data was being manipulated. Could you provide an example or a specific cybersecurity challenge or incident that you encountered throughout your career, and how did you approach and mitigate those challenges?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots, but I would just pick what is probably the most relevant one. Ransomware. I think it's been in the news almost every week, and most organizations are going through managing this particular incident, right? So, I mean, if you just take ransomware as a cybersecurity incident, and most organizations probably are experiencing this. Organizations have deployed a lot of detective and preventive controls in place to defend against ransomware, right? But still, like hackers are leveraging these modern avenues, leverage AI ML models, make their crimes more organized, and find ways to penetrate an organization. So one thing that we recommend organizations when it comes to managing threats like this is like I said earlier, the two core assets, which are data and users, are also the assets or things that a cybersecurity team can take control upon if they wanted to. Threats are something that are controlled by hackers, right? So whatever you try and do, hackers can come up with a new malware variant, they can come up with a new exploit, find ways to get into an organization. But the intent is to either get user credentials, compromise users, or data. So if they build enough controls around data and users, and I'll explain this with an example how it can help them, they'll be able to prevent, let's say, ransomware as an incident. So assume that a ransomware has deployed in an organization's endpoint or network, and it's now trying to encrypt a lot of data. Of course, it does that by getting access to somebody's user credential, right? So the way that user credential is going to behave, if it's in the hands of a hacker or a ransomware tool, is going to be drastically different than how that particular user will be interacting with that organization's data, right? So if organizations have these controls and monitor data access patterns, and the easiest way to probably defend against a ransomware is if there is any tool that is encrypting more than 100 files, I'm just giving an example, 100 files in less than a minute, then validate with the user, is he the one who's encrypting those files, or is he launching an application which is encrypting those files? If they don't get a response from the user, or if the user says no, then contain that behavior, right? So that way, irrespective of what that malware is, just because the organization is monitoring data access patterns and they're detecting a suspicious activity, and getting consent from user that they are not the ones who are doing it, they'll be able to contain that risk and minimize the risk like I said, in this example, to only 100 files. So we recommend organizations to have as many controls around data and users, see if users are significantly deviating from their normal behavior. And if they find a way to do that, they'll be able to predict a lot of breaches and contain breaches before it creates a significant impact. So I think it's important for organizations to also have enough investments around data and users, and not just looking at deploying controls which look at detecting and defending threats.
So you clearly mean to say that organizations have control on the user, and obviously they do not have control over hackers. So they should focus on what they can actually work upon instead of trying to always prevent, right?
Correct. These two elements are always in their control, and they can wish, if they wish, they can have them in control. The biggest problem is these two elements are not in their control right now, and which is why the attack surface is expanding. Because post-pandemic, especially now, data is everywhere, and users are working in less secure environments, and they're made to access data from anywhere and any device. So all this is contributing to an increased attack surface. And these are the two core elements that an organization can take control upon if they wish to. And that's why we recommend them to have enough controls around it.
Right. So as you mentioned that organizations should keep a track on how the user is behaving. It clearly shows that there are some common indicators that an organization might be able to keep a track on to detect if there is cyber espionage or if there is some sort of spying going on. So are there any emerging technologies or trends that can facilitate better data protection?
Yes. So, I mean, organizations have been, deploying a lot of controls to protect data already. But as consultants, when we engage with them, one of the biggest concerns that they have when it comes to data protection is the operational overheads that the strategy introduces for them, mostly because organizations don't have answers to these three questions. And I'm saying probably it might sound simple, but it's very, very complex for organizations to get answers to these questions. And those questions are: one, do organizations know what data is important and where all is it residing, right? And that becomes a foundational layer for enforcing data protection. So organizations have deployed a lot of data prevention controls or data protection controls, but they do not know what all data is probably important for various business functions that exist across the enterprise, right? So that's important. Getting this visibility is very, very critical. Two, are organizations aware that only right users are accessing information with right permissions? And I already said that an example that we saw in one organization, more than 40% of data being overexposed. Because of organizations embracing digitization, because of collaborative tools like Teams, Zoom, etc., information overexposure is rapidly happening for most organizations. So it's important for organizations to get that visibility, ensure that they have a least access principle model around information to ensure that only authorized users now have access to data. The moment they do this, they don't have to worry about unauthorized users gaining access to sensitive information, right? So that risk is totally eliminated. And this authorized users normally would be about 10%. Authorized users who require access to that specific data. Let's say, for instance, finance folder in SharePoint. If only the finance team requires access, why to give access for all other users to get to that particular folder, right? So once organizations are able to do that, then they now have to worry about that authorized user becoming rogue or that authorized user's credentials being compromised. And so that's where I think information usage patterns have to be tracked. And if organizations look at suspicious activity around data access, then they can just get that intel, contain that behavior, and predict breaches before it creates a significant impact. So what we would suggest is for organizations to have an effective data governance framework in place. It's important for them to get this visibility for all data across the enterprise or extended enterprise, and ensure once they get this visibility, they make that visibility into actionable intelligence, have a least access principle model around data, and monitor for suspicious activity. And if they do that, their risk posture will be drastically reduced, depending on the size of the organization, anywhere between 3 to 6 months time. And fortunately, technologies are available in place. Automation can be used to get visibility to all of this much faster.
Right. So as we are on the topic of spying, and we are on the topic of how companies can protect their data, let's look at the recent Porta Go Anywhere data breach, or even what is going on, the Move It data breach that has resulted in a series of cyber attacks now by cloud ransomware. So in a situation like this, where a third party is involved, can companies protect data following the same steps that you mentioned previously? And if that is the case, then are there any other strategies or frameworks that can be used to evaluate the situation and prevent the extent of the attack? Because clearly we are
Yeah.
seeing now the companies and organizations, the US defense system, everybody is going through a turmoil because of the third party data breach.
Yeah, and this can happen to anybody, right? Anybody, any vendor's security tool can be compromised, and this can happen to anybody. So I think from an organization standpoint, it's always important to assess risk before embracing a solution. When I say assessing risk, few things that typically gets missed out with some organizations is when they do evaluations in choosing a technology. While it's focused mostly on feature and functionalities, I think it's important. It's important to check whether what all features and capabilities are there in the tool and whether it's going to be relevant to address the pain point that they have and things like that. But once they fulfill that, it's also equally important to see what are the vendors' best practices or what are the vendors' policies, procedures around testing their own product, how frequently they do that. What is their policy for disclosure of zero-day threats that they identify? How soon are they going to mitigate it? What is going to be their communication strategy? These are also very, very important, especially when they're choosing a very mission-critical tool, which is going to probably store a lot of data, like the way you mentioned. Like these are all managed file transfer solutions which facilitate file transfers, right? And which means that it's going to get access to a lot of sensitive data. That's one part. The second part is, how do they allow, so the user zero trust is something that they need to adopt for any technology, even if it's a cybersecurity or an IT initiative. Like say, for instance, the breaches that you have mentioned, how are they allowing users to access data? How are they allowing privileged users to log in and manage the tool? Is multi-factor authentication enabled? Are they checking for suspicious activity around access to these applications? So I think these are all important, not just give plain access to admins and trust that the tool is going to be securing it, but ensure that wherever it's possible to implement SSO, multi-factor authentication, looking for anomalies, it's done. And lastly, when it comes to data, I think it's important to ensure that if it's critical, identify again for these both examples, Fortran, Move It, it's finally going to get access to data because it facilitates file transfers and make it more easier. So if those, what files are residing in those appliances, is it sensitive? If it is, who all should have access? Is data, if those files are sensitive, is there a need for it to be encrypted and only give it to people who are required to have access to permissions to decrypt it? So all these things have to be in place as a hygiene level to ensure that if such risks happen, still the risk portion would not be significant, but still anything can happen, and there could be a zero-day threat despite organization following all these practices. Still, because of a zero-day threat, they could get some incidents, but if they do all this, the impact of that incidents would be drastically reduced. And even if there is an exploit, because of organizations following a zero trust around allowing users to access information, storing data, giving access to data, the impact of the risk will still be drastically reduced, is what I think.
So while it's clear it's not possible to prevent all data breaches, it's not possible to prevent cyber attacks, but what we can do is reduce the impact it has on an organization by implementing security measures, keeping control of our users, seeing who's able to get access.
Right.
Also, when it comes to data, over the years, we've seen organizations have grown small scale, medium, and big organizations. So there is a data overload. So when it comes to a lot of organizations are relying on cloud security and uploading data on cloud. So when it comes to a situation like this, what are the main challenges organizations face when it comes to securing cloud environments? And how should an organization secure, its data in that aspect? What measures do you suggest for securing data in transit within the cloud environment?
Yeah. So when it's a cloud environment, it could be a SaaS or it could be a PaaS or infrastructure as a service, depending on whatever it is, right? The biggest challenges or problems that customers would have when they embrace a cloud from a cybersecurity standpoint is one, of course, lack of visibility. So earlier they used to own the asset, own the application, own the infrastructure, and they believe that they have things under control. But once it moves to client, there are a lot of moves to cloud. There are a lot of blind spots, and a lot of things are owned by the service provider. So it's important, though there is this lack of visibility and control. Contractually, it's important for the organizations to understand from the cloud service provider what are the security measures that they have and what are the measures that they wish to have to secure that particular application that's going to be hosted on cloud or infrastructure that's going to be hosted on cloud. They have to clearly define their objectives, security goals, and once it's done, they have to check with the service provider how are they adhering to these controls contractually and make it as a formal agreement. So that's important, and I think this lack of visibility should not be blindly accepted. Instead, at least on contract or on formal document, they understand that the cloud service provider is adhering to these processes, and they have deployed these controls, and that's how their security is going to be extended, even if the application or the infrastructure moves to cloud. So I think that's important. Second, I think they also evaluate the compliance and regulatory requirements. I think both governments and industry regulators are making stringent regulations now when it comes to data privacy and security. So when they look at choosing a cloud service provider, they have to see, are they going to be introducing any compliance risks? Is that going to result in any non-compliance? So all that have to be assessed, not as an afterthought, but well in advance, and it has to be future-proof. Is it okay to? I mean, probably most regulations are going to mandate for governments to store citizen and consumer personal data within those geographical boundaries. So it's important to also look at these factors before choosing a cloud service provider and ensure that just because of having another cloud service strategy or a cloud strategy, they're not increasing their compliance and regulatory risk. That's the second thing that I would just say it's important to assess before organizations go and embrace a cloud strategy. Once it's done, I think then it's a normal thing, like how constantly customers evaluate their own risk posture. It's important that they also evaluate the risk posture of the cloud the application or the infrastructure that is hosted on cloud. They have to constantly look for misconfigurations that probably exist within the application or cloud infrastructure, periodically or continuously perform risk assessments and ensure that the risk around that is minimized significantly. But I'll still go back to the same thing when it comes to data security. It's important to know what data is sensitive in that cloud data store, how overexposed it is, and always look for suspicious activity. And once they do that, they'll be able to have a very good framework in detecting data breaches and containing them faster, is what I think, Avantika.
Very rightly said. It's evident that cybersecurity is the need of the hour, and organizations should start, and irrespective of the scale, they should start investing in cybersecurity because user data is at high risk. This also comes to the topic of the skill gap in cybersecurity. And could you share any specific industries or sectors that you believe need cybersecurity professionals, and what factors individuals should consider when choosing these specializations or specialized sectors?
No, I think cybersecurity is a need across industry verticals right now. So there's a tremendous shortage of cybersecurity skill set in different industry verticals, and it's common. I think I wouldn't just narrow it down to a specific industry vertical. I think it's a requirement across all industry verticals to have the best possible talent to enforce comprehensive cybersecurity strategies. But typically, we see BFSI, fintech, ITIS firms, and certain healthcare firms in investing a lot on cybersecurity, and that makes them to have a lot of cybersecurity professionals for them. And similarly, there are a lot of SIs who offer cybersecurity services to their customers and prospects, and they need a huge pool of talent to address these requirements of customers effectively. But however, I think there is a common requirement and there's a tremendous cybersecurity skill shortage. And sorry, what was the second question, Avantika? I just missed the second part.
So I wanted to know if you could share what factors should individuals, especially who are considering to get into cybersecurity, what should, like when they are choosing specializations or fields, like what should be their approach? Because at present, cybersecurity is vast, and I feel despite it being the need of the hour, there's not much awareness about it, especially in the younger generation. So what should they look out for when they're looking at specialization? How should they approach it?
It's a very good question, and I think it's important we as a community, create this awareness with youth and things like that. But like the way it applies for any field, not just cybersecurity, right? Initially, when somebody wants to get into a domain, it's important to be a generalist more than a specialist, because it's important to know a lot of things about a specific field, like say cybersecurity. When somebody's starting a career, not just get into a specialized domain, but just get to know about all aspects around cybersecurity. And this applies to any field, not just cybersecurity. I think that's important. The first, I would say, 5 to 8 years, it's important for these candidates to get exposure to all the facets around cybersecurity. But once they do that, then I think it's very important to specialize skills or hone our skills into a specific domain and become specialists there, because that's how our career opportunities also expand, right? So I think initially I would say the generalist and focus a lot on building the soft skills and communication. I think that's very, very important. It's very important to communicate cybersecurity effectively with different stakeholders, because if the problem that this particular strategy does not, if somebody is not able to comprehend the value of a cybersecurity strategy and what business outcomes it's going to bring, whatever and however cybersecurity practitioners try to get budgets, it's going to be very, very tough. So it's also important to hone the soft skill aspect, understand the business values that the cybersecurity strategy is going to address, and what sort of outcomes from a business perspective cybersecurity is going to help is something that also we as when somebody's trying to get into cybersecurity need to know. So I would say, yeah, be generalists, try to learn everything around cybersecurity. And once you reach a specific stage, then I think it's important to specialize. And certain things that are hot as of now, I would say, is automation, cloud, IoT, AI/ML, and then a lot of consulting requirements are also needed. So understand processes, understand different regulatory demands, because organizations are looking at enhancing privacy frameworks, adhering to different regulatory requirements. So understand privacy and regulation better, because that's going to be there for a very long time. So these are certain domains that we would recommend cybersecurity specialists to focus once they get an understanding of all facets around cybersecurity.
Very rightly said, just like the field, you cannot limit yourself to one particular specialization. You have to keep evolving, like you said, automation, AI, and policies, compliance, it all comes under one umbrella, but there's a lot to learn from it.
And sorry, I missed one important thing. And I think the foundation to be a good cybersecurity person is to know operating systems, networks, and the basic applications. Those are all like email and things like that, DNS. So those are all very, very important. So while all these fancy terms are there, it's important to be very strong on the foundational elements. And once they become strong there, they'll be able to pick up things much faster, irrespective of what new technology or facet gets added into cybersecurity is what I think of. Yeah.
That's absolutely correct. So I have saturated all my questions. If there's anything else you would like to add, your views have been very informative for me, and I think our viewers are actually going to learn a lot from this video. So is there anything else you would like to add from your end?
No, nothing much. Again, I just wanted to thank you for this opportunity and for these great questions. It made me think a lot while I was answering too. So thank you so much for this opportunity again. And like I said, the attack surface is going to be constantly evolving. So it's important for organizations to always or continuously assess risk and ensure that their security posture is is addressing to the current attack surface, and try to have as many controls around things that they can control upon, which is users and data. If they do that, I think most organizations would be able to predict a lot of breaches and contain before it creates a significant impact.
Correct. I hope we are able to bring this out to the people who are seeing it. Thank you so much, Mr. Maheswaran. I'll stop recording now.